Hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of Building Sustainability. I am Jeffrey Hart.
And I'm Joe Derwin.
Joe's here.
Hi there.
So finally, my partner in crime, Joseph Derwin, is with us.
Same place, same time.
Yeah.
Coming at you live from Southwold.
And yeah, so the plan has always been for you to join in.
Definitely. I've been looking forward to it. So it's a good opportunity to get it started.
And it's good because Hartwin, so me and Joe, are now on site in Southwold. We are prepping for the big summer build. Where are we up to so far?
So first week, we've got some lovely holes dug by a local groundworks crew, which has been great. They've done a fantastic job. And
the neatest holes I've ever seen.
Super square and flat and lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a joy to fill them with limecrete.
Pretty incredible.
Looking forward to that. And we've been running around like idiots trying to set up an office and a marquee and toilets and showers and order vast quantities of screws and other things. It's really good.
Yeah, and students arrive on Friday and Saturday, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're going to arrive and they're here for 16 weeks and they're going to build 2 straw bale workshops.
Yeah.
Lots of super exciting natural building techniques.
Yeah.
Straw bale, walls, earth plasters, earth floor.
Yeah, roundwood timber framing, stick framing, natural insulations.
Traditional heritage oak framing.
Indeed. Lime plaster, clay plaster, lime wash, natural finishes.
So this month's guest is Judith Thornton. Judith is working as a researcher at Aberystwyth University. She researches growing plant-based insulation, and she talks a little bit about what she does and what they do as a sort of department in this podcast. She talks a little bit about the use of Miscanthus.
Yes, an excellent grass.
Yeah. So her focus is on.
I suppose it's finding the kind of the most appropriate material to be used in any given environment, isn't it? So it's not saying that at the moment we look at straw as being a very kind of ubiquitous material, and while it's been a very good starting point, she's looking at it more as a kicking off point, and we can take some of the values that we find in straw and see what we can find in other materials and see whether they're more appropriate to use them in different locations, and see if they could be more environmentally friendly as well.
And also looking at designing, straw is a byproduct, and actually looking at growing things for use as an insulation.
So like as a cash crop for insulation or structure of the building. Yeah. And looking at ways that we can integrate that so it's a beneficial cycle rather than something that depletes the environment. So what they called a perennial, is it? Rather than an annual crop. Really interesting stuff.
So I went down to Aberystwyth University to meet Judith, and she gave me a tour of their facilities there, and she took me to the most incredible greenhouse.
I'm very jealous.
So to briefly describe it, it's all super controlled temperature, sunlight, humidity and all that kind of thing. But it's just a series of conveyor belts, and they can have hundreds and hundreds of plants all in individual pots, all with a little barcode. Yeah. And then once a day or however long they deem it, each plant gets sort of rolled out individually, gets weighed, gets a set amount of water, then gets taken into a little photo booth where it gets photos taken from multiple different angles, and then it gets wheeled back on its conveyor belt back to the back of the queue with all the other specimens. And it's all automated, and they've got loads of different crops. I'll put some pictures up of the photos I took when I was there. Right. They've got just hundreds of different things. They're growing different species, and they're also growing different things with different amounts of water. See if they're drought tolerant, or see if they're flood tolerant.
Brilliant. So it's like a cross between like Willy Wonka and Yo Sushi.
and
with Triffids.
That's it.
Sounds amazing.
It's great. What else to say about this episode? Oh, there is. You'll probably notice that about 2/3 of the way through, we had to change a room, so there's a little bit of a change in ambiance. So just in case you're unnerved by that.
Acoustic wizardry has not quite flattened it out.
No.
Oh well. I heard there was a small amount of Jeffrey schooling.
Thanks, Joe. Well, it's good to preload that. Judith, she challenged me on a few of my sort of preconceived ideas, and it's really valuable. You're actually going to listen to this for the first time, aren't you?
Yes.
And then we'll do the outro, and you can let me know what you think. But without further ado, enjoy the podcast. So, Dr. Judith Thornton. I was looking at your slides from the SBUK.
Oh, okay.
Big Straw Bale Gathering.
Yes.
And I clocked the doctor, so I was...
Yeah. Doctor in something quite irrelevant, unfortunately.
Right. What are you a doctor in?
How the brain controls breathing during exercise.
Right.
Yes.
So that's very relevant to what you're doing now.
Exactly. Not very relevant at all. I've had quite a short attention span, I think, and flicked through various different careers. But yes, doing a PhD was a really interesting experience in the sense of the level of detail and precision that goes into getting good answers to questions.
Right.
Because it's relatively easy to ask a question, but it can easily take you 5 years to find out a proper answer.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the... I think that's one of the difficulties of how businesses and end users of research results, how they how to help them interact with universities.
Mm-hmm.
You ask a university academic a question and they'll come back 10 years later with an answer. But you ask a building consultancy firm a question and they know that you need an answer in 3 weeks' time.
Yeah.
So they are very dependent on the literature that's been generated by university research.
Right. So 5 years before.
Yes.
And I suppose, well, would it be right to assume that actually having your doctorate in it's taught you how to do the process?
Yes, the process of scientific discovery. I suppose the interesting thing about the process of scientific discovery is in statistical terms, you're wrong until you prove yourself otherwise, which is quite an interesting mindset to start with, because everybody's like, I've got a wonderful idea, but your starting point has to be that your idea is rubbish and no better than anything else, which is quite a weird starting place, because it's not your natural inclination. Like we were having a look at some plant material earlier, and you're like, "This looks amazing." And I'm like, "No, it's awful until we've proved it's better than anything else. We're wrong. This is the worst material known to mankind."
Has that trained you to be a pessimist then?
Yeah, which is really rubbish, because I don't like being a cynical person, but I think you have to be, in a way, to be good at science.
Well, you can quite easily sort of taint and lead your results if you're going the other way.
Yes, very much so. And I think that's one of the things I find quite interesting about people who work with natural materials is there's certainly sort of quite a few people that work with natural materials who have got a material of choice.
Yeah.
And they like that material, and you ask them why, and it's a very sort of complex and internal reason why. I mean, people that like building with hemp, for example, that's a classic. You ask them, have they ever tried any other material? And they look at you as if you're entirely mad. You know, it's like somebody's been using the same, I don't know, eating the same breakfast cereal every day for the last 50 years and has never tried a different breakfast cereal. And wouldn't, it just seems a little bit odd that we're not more technology neutral.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah. Trying to get the right material for the right reaction, the right performance.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, the thing is like, you know, we breed particular plants here in this department. You know, we do a lot of oats, we do a lot of miscanthus, we do a lot of forage grasses, and, you know, some of my colleagues would dearly love, you know, miscanthus to be the answer to everything, but it's not. You know, to me, all I want the natural building materials industry to understand is that there are lots of different plants available and they have different properties, and let's have a conversation about what particular properties you're looking for.
Yeah. And
then we might be able to find you a plant that has those properties. And, you know, it might be that it doesn't make that much difference which plant you're using in some applications, and there'll be other applications where it makes an enormous difference. So particularly if you're looking at biodegradation. So, you know, how liable is your straw type material to rot?
Yeah.
If you have accidental moisture ingress, for example. Marked difference between different straw species, and also quite likely, although we've not demonstrated it in a convincing manner yet, between different varieties of the same straw. So wheat A versus wheat B, you look at their physical characteristics and they're quite different in terms of their stem thickness and their stem strength.
Yeah.
And wheat breeding has conventionally been about, you know, those grains on the top and the value of that. But along the way, they've acquired a whole load of data on the thing that stops that wheat head from hitting the ground.
Yeah.
You know, they want their stems to be tough. So having a look through some of those back catalogues of varieties which have got particular good stem properties is, you know, it's a relatively simple exercise to do, which would be of interest to people that build with straw.
So you have that data.
Yeah, so that back catalogue exists. The extent to which the properties that get measured relate to something that's useful in a straw bale wall is slightly difficult to determine.
Yeah, so you're not measuring like the U value of the stem.
No, so because that's not the relevant bit to to the farmer that's growing the wheat. But there's stuff on stem diameter, there's stuff on height, there's stuff on lodging resistance. So the likelihood that the plant is going to fall over on a windy day. You know, you see arable fields with whole patches of crop that's just fallen over,
right,
for example. And then that means, you know, the reason the farmer's interested in that is that means the head of the plant is on the ground and is rotting and is not fit.
Yeah,
anymore.
No good.
So these properties have been measured, and then it's a question of saying, well, let's take ones that look particularly good on those properties and design a test that mimics biodegradation in a straw bale wall. To see if actually that property of stem thickness and resilience does actually relate to then how well it breaks down.
If we go back a step, so the question I'm always asked when I'm demonstrating straw or talking about straw is when it rot. And the sort of stock answer, I guess, is that it needs moisture content and it needs moisture content, so it will break down, and therefore, you know, care is taken when it's baled, how it's stored, how it's installed to
Yes. And yeah, I mean, that's entirely sensible. So fungi, there are different approaches to it. So for example, you could start with a sterile material.
Yeah.
So you could start with a straw that had no fungal spores in it at all.
So sort of, as in it's been sterilised.
Yes, yeah. and that is a complete anathema to lots of people who work with straw, but it's effectively what you do if you buy cellulose insulation that's been treated with borate, because you don't want it full of insects and you don't want it catching fire. So we do have natural materials that get treated in a way to stop their breakdown.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should do that with straw. I'm simply saying that is a way of stopping buildings rotting, is making sure there is no microbial activity in that straw.
I mean, that's at time of install, then.
Yes.
You can't really control it from there on in,
Yeah.
can you?
I mean, effectively, that's what you do with hemp lime, because the lime kills anything that would grow in the hemp lime mix. But yeah, you're right. The main way of stopping straw rotting is to stop the moisture getting in. Yeah.
So, is there cases where buildings, so straw buildings, have been rotting?
Yes. So there are plenty of straw bale. I mean, if you keep the material dry, it doesn't rot. Yeah. And that's fine. And that's mostly about really good construction details.
Yeah.
So that's, and I think within the straw bale industry, that's pretty variable, and that's partly relates to the sort of the self-build ethos. I think it partly relates to the strange sort of lack of design details that often get used. There seems to be this assumption that the drawings you use to get planning permission are then what you use to build a building with. Well, no, hang on a minute. There's an enormous phase of drawings in between those planning permission drawings and you actually arriving on site with all of the details in. And those details are the bits that stop moisture getting in.
Yeah.
How do you wrap that membrane around that timber post? How do you make sure that the gap between the clay plaster and the timber upright isn't actually a source of moisture moving through the building? All of that kind of stuff. And I think one of the reasons that some of these buildings get built quite badly is because those details never exist. So people are having to make it up as they go along on site, which is an incredibly difficult thing for people to do.
Yes, certainly. I mean, self-builders generally are not, strangely, are not actually people that work in construction.
Yeah, and they are the least able to work it out as they go along. But they are the sector that is most likely to have to, because they haven't spent that extra money on getting detailed drawings before they start their construction.
Sure.
So I think, poor construction details are something that the straw industry has to accept happens, and therefore you do get some moisture ingress. And then, 10 years post-construction, there's also, just random stuff like your gutter gets blocked and there's water cascading down the wall for a week or two until you can get up there to unblock the gutter. So I think we have to accept that there will be, even with the best quality construction, there will be some moisture that gets into walls.
Yeah.
And then it's a question of how likely that material is to biodegrade. And there are distinct differences between straws in their biodegradability.
Yes. So you showed a table at the Big Straw Bale Gathering, which was of, I think, the different wheat varieties. And, so even within just wheat, there's a huge variation.
Yes. There's enormous differences between 40 whatever different varieties of wheat that are available, and then there's also the complication of it depends to an extent on where that plant is grown. So a genetically identical plant grown in Wales will look different to the plant that's grown in East Anglia.
Right.
So that complicates the situation further. But I mean, I think broadly speaking, you'd say that there are certain species that are less likely to rot.
Yeah.
And that there's some overlap depending on between those bands of degradability according to where it's being grown. But there are probably some fairly simple rules that will emerge. And it's never been studied properly in relation to straw bale buildings. It's been studied quite a lot in relation to when you plough straw back into soil.
Right.
To return the nutrients to the soil.
So how quickly it breaks down.
Yeah, so it's been studied into how quickly it breaks down in the soil. It's also been studied in relation to the suitability of straw for bioethanol production. So how easy is it to break down the straw to get the sugars out to create biofuels? So we've got hints from those types of experiments about what types of straw are likely to be more resistant to degradation.
And presumably the farmer will know exactly what type of wheat they're growing.
Yeah, so this was really fascinating to me. The farmer knows what variety of wheat they're growing, but you go to the big straw bale gathering and you ask a room full of straw bale builders what varieties of wheat they've used, and there was not a single person in that entire conference who knew what variety of wheat they had used on any building ever.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so interesting. There's this complete sort of, it's a different world that people are moving in. And even the idea, it's a really basic idea that barley is much more prone to rotting than wheat.
Yeah.
You ask any farmer that's growing barley and wheat, and they're like, oh yeah, we must get the barley straw straight off the field. If it's raining, it's rotten. It won't be worth anything. And it's really important that we get this off the field really quick.
Yeah.
A 5-minute conversation with an arable farmer, you'd learn that piece of information. But for some reason, that isn't a piece of information that's widely known within the straw bale industry.
I wonder if that's just. Because we believe in the big overhang, the good boots and the good hat.
Absolutely.
Therefore, it's not necessary. We've dealt with it.
Yes, and I think that's true if we live in an ideal world where all our construction details are perfect.
Yeah, and freak accidents don't happen.
I guess my concern, even with supposedly excellent straw bale construction details, is that the idea of creating airtight buildings is not popular within sort of the natural building industry. And I find that really interesting because obviously if you've got uncontrolled air movement through where your light fitting goes into your wall, or where your extractor vent goes in, or between your clay plaster and your timber upright, anywhere you've got air movement, you've got moisture in that air, which may then condense as it moves through the wall. So unless you have an airtight membrane on your natural building material, you are expecting significant amounts of water to pass through your building fabric.
When you say membrane, are you talking? Do you count the plaster skin as a membrane?
Yes. So, when I say membrane, I mean airtight layer.
Yes.
So when you look at a design detail, where is your airtight layer? So, for example, you can get how would you do an airtight junction between clay plaster and a timber upright that you were plastering against? Well, there is actually a tape that does that. It's half the width is plastering mesh, half of it's airtightness tape, and you just tape it up the timber. But it's not widely used. And it's okay if your airtightness layer was somewhere else. So if you've got, let's say you've got plyboard or something, and that's taped, that's fine. You don't need your clay plaster to timber junction to be airtight, because that wasn't where your airtightness layer was. But if you don't have an airtightness layer, you're running really quite significant risks of moisture getting into materials, which we know are prone to degradation.
I suppose from Hartwin's, our kind of viewpoint is on the longevity of tapes. How long is it going to be before the stickiness breaks down and actually your tape isn't performing anymore? And also just adding another probably petrochemical into the building is a problem for, I know, a lot of people.
Yeah, I think the petrochemical argument is, I have to say, just innumerate.
Right.
I think if you look at the amount of carbon sequestration in a straw bale building, let's say you've got, the best data available says 15 tonnes of CO2 stored in that building. Now, most individuals in the UK have got an annual CO2 emissions of about 10 tonnes.
Right.
So storing 15 tonnes in a 2.5 person household for 50 years is not a very large number. And so it's compared to what somebody is using on an annual basis.
Sure, yeah.
So to add a couple of kilos of CO2 by using an airtightness tape, but it might extend the lifetime of your building by 20 years is, just some of these. And I've heard people saying the same stuff about, we should be using sisal twine instead of polypropylene baling string. I'm like, why did you turn up on site in a vehicle today if you were interested in anything to do with petrochemicals?
Yeah.
I think if you have a philosophical dislike of petrochemicals, that's fine. I think, but to pretend to make out that it's sort of part of the environmental equation is, I think, it's just simply wrong. I don't mind if people don't, if you don't want an airtight building or you don't want to use a membrane or an airtightness tape for some emotional reason, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But I think it's when we make sort of false claims about why we're not using a particular material.
Sure.
I just I get annoyed with it. Yeah.
I suppose, for me personally, one of the things I love about natural homes, certainly clay plastered ones, is that they're doing so much for the indoor air quality, and therefore to add in something that's potentially off-gassing or...
So I find this really interesting because we've got an inherent assumption here that natural materials are safe and man-made materials are dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's... I don't understand where that comes from, because I did this once when I was giving a lecture to a bunch of students. I said, let's just write down on the board all the things that anyone in the room is allergic to.
Yeah.
And we had dust, we had pollen, we had cats, dogs, penicillin, all sorts of stuff. Everything on the list was a natural thing.
Yeah.
What people are allergic to are natural materials. And yet we have this fear of chemicals. We've got this really strong fear of formaldehyde, for example. Now, formaldehyde is actually a natural breakdown product in your body.
Yeah.
It's part of a standard biochemical pathway. And there are plenty of man-made materials that are likely to have bad effects on indoor air quality. But the biggest risks to indoor air quality in the UK are cold and damp and mold.
Yeah.
Mold is the most dangerous thing on indoor air quality. So to be worried about off-gassing of a plastic light fitting or an airtightness membrane, and you've got a wall that's completely full of mold spores. You've got a wall that's full of mold spores, and if your building rots, and it's not airtight because you didn't want your petrochemical membrane, that little bit of tape between the plaster and the timber, all of those mold spores are going to come in and kill you. It's all completely natural. You'll die of natural causes. Sorry. I just find this, natural is safe, man-made is dangerous thing really interesting.
Yeah.
As a philosophy.
No, definitely. It's good to be challenged on it. It's because it is definitely an assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You want to build and you want to live in a natural materials house because you prefer natural materials. That's great. But the risks of saying that natural things are safe mean that you get these issues, for example, with molds or musty smells in buildings.
Yeah.
Or timber, absolute classic. People sawing up chunks of timber need to wear masks because wood dust is highly carcinogenic. But we want to think that natural materials are safe, and we're putting ourselves at risk just from having that assumption to start with.
Yes, well, I think there's quite a lot of knowledge now that the extraction is. I think it's in the coming years. It's going to be mandatory to have all sorts of very, very efficient dust extraction for tools, for cutting wood.
Yes. Yes.
It's already the case in a sort of workshop environment, but I think going out onto the building site, even when it's fresh air around you, and I think that's going to be a big change coming.
Yeah, well, I mean, anything you can breathe in is potentially quite dangerous because your lungs are a very, very sensitive layer. They're designed to let stuff move into and out of your body.
Yeah.
So that is anything that can get deep into your lungs, whether it's natural or man-made, is potentially dangerous.
Mm-hmm. So earlier we did a little tour of the facilities here, and there's would you like to describe what goes on in this department?
This department, yeah. So Institute of Biological, Environmental and Rural Sciences at Aberystwyth University, and it's gone through various iterations over the years, but the starting point was the Welsh Plant Breeding Station that got set up in 1919. And that was largely about growing grasses for agriculture to feed animals.
Right.
So this place has been breeding plants for 100 years. It's our 100th anniversary this year. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Happy birthday to Ibis.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I find really interesting about plant breeding is what we're basically doing is domesticating plants and taking this enormous and amazing diversity that nature has provided us and trying to make things better or more suitable for particular purposes. Yeah. So a lot of the facilities we saw on a little walk around this morning were related to breeding. And one of those is the National Plant Phenomics Centre, which is, as you saw, the most astonishing space-age greenhouse
it's incredible.
Imaginable. And basically, it's a plant beauty contest. It has a whole load of cameras, and each plant can have its photograph taken from multiple different angles every day of its life. And that allows you to look at things like the overall plant biomass. So if you're interested in the overall leaf area, because that's the bit that gets eaten, that's what you'd be interested in. It allows you to look at the shape of seeds on plants, for example. We have the capacity to change the amount of water that the plant gets, so you can look at how it responds to drought. There's a separate facility in there for looking at plant roots, so you can look at how well the plant responds to drought and also whether it can help mitigate flooding. So we do lots of work on how to make plants. What's your ideal plant? If you had a list of design criteria, what would you want your forage grass to look like, or your biomass plant to look like? Some of the other facilities we had a little look at were the Beacon facility for biorefining. So the idea of the Beacon project is to help Welsh businesses with their research and development needs in relation to turning plants into products.
Right.
So, we used to have a plant-based economy, and then we had this amazing fossil fuel economy that we're in at the moment. And because of climate change and peak oil and limitations on natural resources, we are going to have to go back to having a plant-based economy. But we're not going back, we're going forwards. We've done a whole load of science, and the future plant-based economy can look very different to the past. So we are interested in turning plants into all sorts of products. So that might be bioplastics, that might be building materials. We do quite a lot of work in there on creating better food products.
Okay.
Or we are also looking at getting pharmaceuticals out of plants, because obviously most pharmaceuticals came from plants originally.
You say obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, all this natural remedy stuff. And then actually, so aspirin, for example, that's a naturally occurring compound. And scientists have conventionally sort of taken their inspiration from nature and then learnt how to synthetically derive that compound. We're now in the position to be able to screen plants, so get a complete list of all of the different chemicals that are in a plant, and say, oh, you know what, that one actually is really effective against Alzheimer's disease. How can we get this out of the plant? And then it becomes an exercise in smashing, squishing, juicing, filtering, mincing, concentrating, evaporating to get your pharmaceutical compound out of your plant. We do quite a lot of work in there with food companies, so trying to extract particular flavours. So, for example, we've been doing a project where we are trying to get the umami flavour out of a waste liquid.
Okay, a waste liquid.
Yeah, so a waste liquid from producing another food product.
Right, I see.
Which is going down in the drain at the moment, but has got fairly low concentrations of a compound that causes this umami taste.
Right.
And the company that are doing this with us, they are interested in reducing the salt content of food. But one of the problems is if you take salt out of food, it doesn't taste so nice. So you need to put this umami taste in to improve the taste. And conventionally, that's been done with monosodium glutamate. But people aren't keen on that. So to be able to have a natural flavour that creates this umami taste that this company has produced from their waste liquid, but they can put into their food products. That's just an example of the kind of work we do in Beacon.
So you've recently done a project with Miscanthus?
Yes. So we've so this place has been breeding grass since 1919, and in the early 2000s, DEFRA came to us and said, we need biomass crops for North Europe, UK and Northern Europe. What do you suggest? And our plant breeders said, well, there's this really nice plant in Asia called Miscanthus. And there's lots of interesting things about Miscanthus as a plant. It's evolved completely separately on lots of different islands around Southeast Asia. And that means it's genetically distinct in those different places. Now, those different places have got quite different environmental conditions. So you've got some Miscanthus that's growing at sea level in a salt marsh. You've got some that's growing halfway up a mountain and gets covered in snow. You've got other types of Miscanthus that are subject to drought on a regular basis. So what we basically did was we sent a team of collectors over to Southeast Asia, and they just did this magical mystery tour, a magical mystery tour of botanists, basically, looking at all of these different plants, going, oh, that's different from the one just down the road. Let's take a sample of this. And that's all sort of quite controlled in terms of legislation. So
when was this happening, sorry?
So this was in the early 2000s.
Okay, so recent.
Yes. So basically collected several hundred different types of Miscanthus, knew what environmental conditions they were grown in, knew who owned the site, which is quite important in later years, because if you then develop a variety that came from that parent plant, then money goes back to the place that plant was. Yeah, it's part of,
royalties.
Yeah, royalties go to it's like, you can't sort of rape a country for its minerals, and you can't just take somebody's take the genetic diversity of a country and exploit it for your own purposes without paying royalties. So we know the ultimate parents or grandparent, great grandparent of every plant every Miscanthus variety that we've got, so that we can pay that back. So all these bits of plants arrived in the UK. They obviously got quarantined and inspected and cleaned up to make sure there wasn't any soil on them. They get grown up and then in controlled environment. Again, making sure there's no pests or diseases on them. They get inspected, and when it's clear that actually they're completely safe, then the fun begins. Then you can start creating your ideal plants.
Right.
And plant breeding is a design problem. You have a list of criteria that you're trying to get, and you basically look for parents with some of those criteria, cross them with each other, and hopefully create your ideal plants. And that process is the same way we've been domesticating plants for sort of thousands of years. But if you do it in a fairly scientifically controlled way, you can hopefully sort of squish that domestication process into a 20-year time frame.
And so what was your interest in the Miscanthus?
So Miscanthus is an interesting crop because it does C4 photosynthesis, which is a particularly efficient sort of photosynthesis that plants in hot climates do, which means they're very water use efficient.
Okay.
But despite the fact that it sort of has got this hot country property to it, it actually grows quite well in cool climates as well.
Uh-huh.
I suppose the really important thing about Miscanthus is that it's a perennial.
Right.
Okay, so it dies back to the rhizome each year, so it has these underground rhizomes. So you can harvest it. So you basically chop it down to ground level, take the plant away, and then it just springs up again from the rhizome in the spring, grows to 2 or 3 meters tall, and then you cut it down again. And you can carry on like that for 20 years. Perennials are good for 2 reasons. Firstly, they require less fertiliser and less herbicide because they've got all of the nutrients are there in the plant root. And so the plant takes off very quickly in the spring. And it basically just outcompetes. The second reason perenniality is good is because you don't plough up your soil every year. And in terms of soil carbon, arable is disastrous,
right?
Because you are constantly ploughing and constantly releasing CO2 back into the atmosphere.
Yes, and it's reducing the fertility of the soil as well, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, and you have to be adding that fertility back. So if you are developing a biomass crop, so the original intention with Miscanthus was to develop a bioenergy crop for UK and Northern Europe. It needs to be perennial. It needs to grow on land that isn't suitable for food production.
Yeah.
And it needs to have fairly low input requirements. Otherwise, we're back with the first generation biofuels where we're basically, burning food.
Yes.
And we can't do that in the future. So Miscanthus kind of fits those requirements, and the trick then is to breed varieties that are suitable for wide variety of conditions, and maintain some diversity between different varieties, so that you could have one that was slightly more frost tolerant, or you could have one that you could take an autumn harvest from instead of a February-March harvest from.
And presumably you can also think about changing climate, so ones that are going to be future-proofed in terms of drought.
Yes, absolutely. It's a pretty deep-rooted plant as a perennial, so It's moderately drought tolerant. It does, last summer it was definitely a lot shorter than it would have been in a wetter summer. That is what you'd expect.
Yeah. So you're actually growing this?
Yeah, so we grow, we do a lot of trials on Miscanthus because we're trying to create this ideal variety.
Yeah.
And then
for building or for?
So largely for bioenergy at the moment. So it's mostly burnt in straw-fired power stations.
Yeah.
So in the UK, about probably by the end of this year, there'll be about 1 million tonnes a year of straw burnt in straw-fired power stations for electricity and heat. And Miscanthus is going into those power stations.
Is that currently wheat and barley, or is it
it's almost all wheat at the moment. Barley straw is more valuable because you can feed it to animals.
Okay.
So most of the straw going into those power stations is wheat.
Okay. But that could be substituted with Miscanthus.
It could be substituted with Miscanthus going forwards, yeah, or partially substituted. The other, people are also interested in anaerobic digestion for generation of methane. So people are interested in AD of Miscanthus. My personal interest is in its use as a building material. So it's quite striking how much more woody it is as a straw compared to wheat or barley. It's got a higher lignin content, which is a characteristic of wood, and it's intuitively it feels like it should be a material that's quite tough. This is a plant that's evolved to grow to 3 meters high each year,
so there's some strength in that.
And not fall over. So there's got some significant strength in that, whereas wheat, and we've kind of gone the opposite way. Native wheats, used to have 6 foot high stems that were really, really spindly, and actually that caused the plant to fall over. So wheat stems got shorter and shorter and shorter over the years. So we've got good reason to expect that Miscanthus is more resistant to breakdown than wheat. And if you're interested in your biodegradable building material from not biodegrading, then Miscanthus seems like a good bet.
Nice. And so how has that progressed? What trials and...
So we've built the world's first Miscanthus bale house, just down the road in Aberystwyth, and that just... it's really boring actually. It just looks like any other straw bale house. It's nothing, there's nothing particularly sort of innovative in terms of, it's bales of straw. It just happens to be bales of a particular type of straw, which if it gets wet is less likely to rot.
Great.
So interested in using different, so that's about as far as it's got with Miscanthus baling. Quite interested in doing a more detailed experiments on degradability of straw types, specifically as it applies to straw bale buildings. So burying straw in wet bales of straw and then taking it out and measuring it, how broken down it is over time. I suppose the other big chunks of work I'm doing involve adding plant material into plasters, so to create thermally insulating plasters. So if you have, this is mostly for retrofit. So that damp patch behind the kitchen cupboard that gets mould on it, gets mould on it because it has water condensing on the surface, and the reason it has moisture condensing on the surface is because it's cold. So you used to have a cold, drafty house, and then you double glazed your windows, and that's great because you don't have condensation on your windows now. You can see out of your windows, but where does all that water condense? It condenses on the coldest spot, and that's that patch behind the kitchen cupboard. So if you can plaster that patch behind the kitchen cupboard with an insulating plaster, then the surface temperature of that patch of wall is higher and you don't get any condensation on it.
No longer the
and it's no longer the mouldy spot.
Aha.
Now, clearly, you need to ventilate your building properly to remove internally generated moisture.
Sure. Yeah, because it's people cooking, breathing, showering.
Yes, absolutely.
And so what sort of materials are you using for that? We're sat in front of
We're sat in front of an unlabelled sample. So that's that could be oilseed rape, it could be miscanthus, it could be hemp, reed canary grass we've looked at. Some people have got a bit of an interest in flax. We've got oats. I think the thing for me with plant-based building materials is that we need to work out what function it performs in any given environment. So if you're creating an insulation material, what you're trying to do is trap air.
Yeah.
That's
trap
not
air within the you're creating insulation by trapping air rather than being airtight.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So within the material. Now that might be in the gaps between different chunks of the material, or it might be within the plant material itself. So you're trying to create some kind of aerobar sort of honeycomb arrangement. And it may not matter particularly what species of plant you use to do that. There will be other applications where it matters much more what species of plant you use, or there might be other properties that you want that insulation material to have. And lots of my colleagues are big fans of particular plants. They've spent their entire careers looking at one particular plant.
Big fans of, but they're not optimistic about them.
They have a scientific fascination in a particular plant, and they've been in an environment that's allowed them to follow that for 20 odd years. Personally, I'm not that fussed. I just want people to use the most appropriate plant for the end purpose.
Nice. And what was you showed me a stick of something earlier that was looked to me like a stick containing expanded foam insulation.
Yeah, so that was oilseed rape. So that's an interesting one because it's got this, as you say, it's got this very, very foamy pith in the middle. And as you say, it just looks like polystyrene. Oh, hello, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike. So it looks like it should be a brilliant insulation material. Why do people use hemp in hemp lime?
Why do they?
Exactly. Why do they? I think it's really interesting in the natural buildings materials industry that people will take what they're given and that they want co-products.
Yeah.
So hemp shiv is just left over from hemp fibre production.
Yeah.
And wheat straw is left after the wheat for flour. And that's okay. And you could use the same argument for oilseed rape, that straw is available. But I guess I'm sort of interested in whether we should be breeding plants as building materials.
So growing your insulation in a field.
Absolutely. In the same way that you grow your food or your fibre or your pharmaceutical, you could grow your building material.
So you're proposing quite a change in. That's quite a revolutionary thing, I'd say.
In a way, I suppose, but we grow plants for different purposes, as it is, and we grow timber as a building product.
Yeah, but timber not so different to growing a grass. It's
yeah. So. I think the idea of using co-products and wastes is interesting, and I really hope people stop referring to straw as a waste product because it clearly isn't a waste product.
Especially if it's being burnt and
yes,
in the
yes, and that's that's an interesting part of the environmental equation. Is if you don't use a material. Or you do use a material, what would happen to it otherwise? And is that other use of it better or worse in environmental terms than the use you would be putting that material to? So you're not going to build a wall out of a precious metal, for example, because that precious metal is better used for something else.
Sure. So you're saying as straw's value goes up as a heating source, or as a, actually, but by taking it as a renewable heating source, by taking it and putting it in a building is actually not its
possibly not the best use for it. Well, I mean, it depends what else you would be burning to use as your heating source, doesn't it?
Yes.
So that's the sort of the consequential part of the equation.
Right. So,
I mean, personally, I do think using straws as building materials is a good use for them, and I can't imagine it ever happening at a scale where it would impact on straw availability for other purposes. I think the downside of straw is that people are taking what they're given as opposed to being discerning customers. And I think there's probably some balance to strike there in terms of having straw that is, if you're going for bales, then specifically baled for building to a particular quality and standard. I'm kind of interested in the whole prefab thing because obviously as soon as you stop using your bale as your unit size, then you can do all sorts of interesting things. Chopping it to different fibre lengths and making different shape wall panels and that sort of thing.
And that bypasses as well the how we're currently we're tending away from baling into the small usable bales that are currently used by the self-building community. And
yes, so as you say, there are far fewer small bales available. Most people are now baling large Hestons, and having done some baling myself, you can absolutely see why. By the time you've carried a few small bales across a field, the amount of handling involved is enormous, and it's not an effective way of clearing a field of straw before you put the next crop in.
Yeah. So what's the question? You've already sort of said where you see the future. Is there an answer to that question that we haven't just spoken about?
I think the future for me is the sort of the 0 to 5 year future for me is conversations between the construction industry and plant breeders about what is the design target.
Yep.
And if we, as plant breeders, if we have a design target, then it may well be that there is already a plant available with the particular properties that you're looking for.
Sure.
It might be that some plant breeding would help to give it a bit of a tweak, but there may be something off the shelf that's ideal for the purpose. So I think even having those conversations about what the design target is quite a major step further. And I'm not just talking about the natural buildings materials industry here. I'm talking about the construction industry overall, because they are going to be the big volume demand. I think in the longer term, what might come out of some of those conversations is that farmers are farming land specifically to grow building materials, whatever those plants might be.
So I'll come back to you with a list of my dream bale then.
Your dream straw properties, and that's it's quite interesting when you have conversations with people about what their dream material is. Because straw bale builders seem quite short-termist. They're very interested in how the bale is for them whilst they're building with it. They're less interested in what it might be like for the householder.
Right.
Which is a bit of a shame, I think.
It's certainly interesting. We've got a build coming up this summer, and we've got there's 3 different suppliers that we're talking to for straw, and I've never gone to them and asked what wheat is it. I'm looking forward to having that conversation, and I'll come back to you. And
that's
ask,
it. They look totally blank.
Because it's always been so far about density and about density and moisture.
Yeah, and do you actually monitor the moisture content? Do you have a probe that you jam into bales?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's great, because a lot of straw bale builders don't. And I think it's quite risky.
Yeah.
You want to know that when the bales go into the walls, they're dry.
Mm-hmm.
And if they get wet at a later date, this is just insuring yourself against risk, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If they're wet at a later date and there is not an obvious construction defect, then that was a block gutter. That's not your problem. But most straw bale builders don't measure the moisture content of bales. I think the density one's interesting, because I suspect what you mean when you say density is won't fall apart when I'm handling it.
Yeah, largely. And will be a plasterable surface.
Yes, so that's a different property, isn't it? So the plasterable surface is about how smooth it is.
I mean, a soft bale is a nightmare to plaster. So it's actually the pushing back.
Yes. Yes, that's true. I guess I was thinking in terms of how easy it was to trim the surface to make it completely flat.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the density one is interesting, because you need your unit of building not to fall apart when you move it around. The ideal insulation, the ideal density for insulation is not going to be the same as the ideal density for you picking it up by the strings and moving it about.
You wouldn't pick it up by the strings. Come on.
Give it a big hug.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's straw bale building rule number 1.
Yes, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? Yes.
After you've tested its moisture.
Always hug your bale.
Well, Judith, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that episode.
That was great. That's a super geeky episode.
That is. There maybe should have been a geeky warning on the
no, people need to get into it. It's brilliant. Really enjoyed that. Some really, really interesting points. Loads of really interesting takes, and I suppose from a builder's perspective, all of the kind of the things that had Judith scratching her head about our world is really interesting to kind of hear that and take that on board, and take those questions for ourselves, I think.
Well, how do you feel about tapes?
Tapes? Well, I think I need to go on a passive house design course, which we've been talking about for the last 3 years. Know your enemy was our approach to the past.
Enemies are strong.
No, but that was our old way of thinking, and I think that the weakness potentially that I'm feeling is that I don't know enough about it to have a correct opinion, and that a lot of my prior thinking was based on the assumptions that were spoken about. I don't have a good building science answer for them, and I'd like to have one.
I think what I realised was that I've been carrying those assumptions with me for a long time. Yeah. And it was incredibly beneficial for me to just be like completely challenged on it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is really good, because we want to be pushing this forward. We want to be building the best things we can, making the best choices that we can. And we have a duty of care to do that for our clients and for the industry. For the world. Indeed. And it's interesting and it's exciting. We are effectively engineers in some small way. And I'm really interested in the whys of things.
Yeah. You like me are a total geek.
Yes.
And getting into these little like, but what's the best?
Yeah, and it's really satisfying to investigate a very tiny detail and then to kind of maybe improve on it a little bit as time goes on, but to have a stock kind of set of tools that we've accumulated. We all have our favourite practical tools that we like using, our favourite level or our favourite pencil or anything like that, and it's no different when it comes to building design, I think. And I think that may be where we as an industry have been falling down, is that we've held on to older details as stock favourites and not really explored new ones.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is a great opportunity with the work that Judith's doing, and no doubt other people in different areas.
So when we go back to see Judith next,
Yeah.
what's our shopping list for the plants she should grow us?
Well, I think
Well,
knowing what to ask is the first one. What are the properties? That's the conversation, isn't it? Is what are the properties that we're looking for in it? Because it's got to be something between a high insulative value, a resistance to biodegrading.
Yeah, sort of bug and
It wants to be all of those things. So it's got to the kind of the performance of the material as a stable material over time is really important, as well as being as thermally efficient as possible. But then I'm also really interested in how it's got to us. Like the perennial aspect, I think, is really fascinating.
I mean, I think that in my mind, that's sort of a given that if we're talking about the next generation, the dream of natural insulators, then it's got to be perennial.
Yes. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to look at regional variations and how that works, because there is a lot of variation just in the UK. But then if you take that across wider Europe and then factor in changes, as you spoke about with climate change, I think I want to feel like we've got a variety of a grass that there are different versions of it that will grow differently in different situations, so that we've got on one side, something that's going to fit lots of different scenarios. I like that idea.
Just slightly tangentially, a quick podcast recommendation is the Nori, Nori podcast. There's an episode with Chris Magwood of Endeavour Centre and Jacob Deveruskin. I've just realised I've never said his name out loud before. Sorry, Jacob, if I've got your name wrong. Yeah, they did a fascinating episode where they just chatted about... Well, it was about how to make homes that sequester carbon. It's a great podcast if you are wanting to listen to that. Any other thoughts from Judith? Sorry, I totally tangentialized.
No, that's great. The wheat varieties thing, I thought that was really fascinating, because I love my tree classification. I love being able to look at things and know what they are. And it had never occurred to me until she asked that embarrassing question at the Big Straw Bale gathering. What wheat varieties are we using? And the silence throughout. And I was like, that's really funny, because I think that I certainly had just appreciated it as it's just one thing. Straw is one thing. That's one plant. And it obviously isn't. And it's obvious in hindsight that there are going to be many different properties to that, and that it does matter. So, I think that's really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to finding out from our supplier for this build what that is, and maybe feedback to Judith and find out what we can expect the properties of that to be, because that's, I see in my future some really geeky wheat top trumps, which makes me very happy.
So at the Big Straw Bale gathering, I said to Judith, I looked her in the eye and I said, I am going to find out what wheat we just used.
Yeah.
And went away and asked the farmer and got nothing back.
I really did enjoy the airtightness discussion, and the kind of the differences, that kind of philosophical difference that she spoke about, I thought was really, really interesting, because it's possible, of course, to have both of those things. But I think it's important to have that distinction to say, I don't like this because of the ethical considerations of the petrochemical industry, but I'm not going to use a false scientific claim to justify it. So I definitely want to look into that more. And I come up with some really sexy details of sealing around our plaster and everything, and making the best use of how our clay plasters and how our wonderful materials that do respond so well for an internal kind of happy atmosphere in your home, how to best make the use of that whilst stopping the devilish moisture finding its way to the spores in the walls. So that was a good bit. I like that.
That was good.
I think like you, it feels really good to be called out on stuff, because that's, for me at that level, I feel like that's where growth happens in the way that we can build. So I'm really pleased to have those little bits pointed out. It's
Nice.
an opportunity to learn more things.
Did you make any other notes?
Prefab stuff. We've been talking about doing prefab things for ages, and I think that it's just given me a renewed excitement to investigate that, given the opening up the kind of material science side of things. Rather than just thinking of things in terms of bales, let's think about them in a holistic way, in terms of being able to clear a field quickly and then deliver a massive Heston to our workshop, and we can pull it apart and use the best bit in the best way to make the best panels. Sounds good. Sounds like a great winter project.
Free ourselves from the bale dominant.
The dominant paradigm of the bales.
Right, that's it. It's late, and
Yes.
I'm sure the good people have had enough of us waffling.
Podcast land. Yes.
Nice. Well, thanks for your input today. I'm looking forward to the next 4 months of building.
Yes.
And obviously that means the next 4 months of joint podcasting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so in the meantime, if people have got any suggestions, we're going to look to start stacking up some more recordings towards the end of the year. So any firm favourites, do drop us a line and let us know. And thanks for the comments you've been putting forward so far. It's very encouraging to know people are listening and enjoying.
Yeah. Oh, I had just the most glorious email the other day.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
was a very lovely pat on the back.
Yeah.
Well
just
done.
Really nice. Thanks. Good. All right. Well, until next time, enjoy.
Yeah, be excellent to each other.
Oh, good sign off. You got a catchphrase already, your first one. Wow. You stole
Stole it.
Yeah. Nice. See you, bye.
Bye.